Today we geek out about Wisdom of Solomon. Hey guys, what's going on? This is Lee from Geek City USA here, and today we're going to talk about a game called Wisdom of Solomon. Now this is put out by Funhill Games and Fantasio Games, and it's coming to Kickstarter here soon. Now this is a worker placement game for 2 to 5 players, and it's set in ancient Israel where you are one of King Solomon's governors and you're trying to expand his influence throughout Israel. Now I'm going to take you over here, I'm going to give you a quick overview on how the game plays, and then we'll come back and I'll give you my thoughts on the game. All right, so here is Wisdom of Solomon, and first let me say that this is a prototype copy of the game, and the final version of the game, the art's subject to change and the pieces are subject to change. However, I will also say that this is a very high quality prototype, and this is a type of prototype that I would be okay if this was to be what I opened in the box. I do know that these houses here, these are going to change in the final version. To fit these squares better, they will be a little bit longer. So here I've set up for a sample 3-player game. In Wisdom of Solomon, you're trying to end the game with the most favor, and that's these numbers here. Those are your points, and that's also your income. So that's the money that you can spend, but it's your favor. And the player with the most favor at the end of the game will win. Now this game will go on until all of these temple tiles have been taken, or until all of these houses have been placed, and these are the customs houses. So when you set up the game, you will deal out 2 fortune cards to each player, and they will keep one and set the other back to the deck. Now these are cards that will give you something when you play them. In this case, earn 1 favor for every exotic gold or copper resource in your possession. But however, if you collect these cards throughout the game and you don't end up using them, these are each worth 2 favor to you at the end of the game. So not only can they be used for the powers or strengths that they have, they can still get you 2 favor points if you don't use them by the end of the game. So you will give 2 to each player. For the sake of this, I'll just give each player 1, and this will be the one that they keep, and we'll set the rest aside there. So when you play the game, you'll have the wisest player go first, or pick first player, however you want. So at the start of the game, the player to the right of the first player will get to buy up to 3 resources from the market here. And then it would go to the next player and then to the starting player. And you do that, you start with 10 favor, so you'll be able to use that to spend as money to purchase these resources. And I'll show that in a little bit later here in this video. Now, as this game is a worker placement game, there are multiple areas that you can set your worker, and I'll kind of go over them at a high level as far as where they are on the map, and then I'll show you each of them a little closer up. So you're going to have the merchant, that is right here, and that's where you can buy and sell goods. You have the trader, who is right here, and that is where you can trade goods. Typically you'll trade 1 good for any 2 other goods, as long as it's not an exotic good. Now these are the exotic goods over here, the blue ones, and those are considered wild, so you can't get those too easily in the game. Over here you have the Levite, and this is where you're able to build areas and sections of the temple. Over here you have the Foreman, which lets you build different buildings. Over on this half of the map, you have the land of Israel. And what this is an area where you're going to get a lot of resources, and you're going to build your network in order to get you even more resources going forward throughout the game. And then finally up at the top here, you have the holy place bonuses. And these are when you end your turns, you could pick one of these, and I'll go over them in a minute here. And that immediately ends your turns, and then you would get that benefit of that location. And now I'm going to show you a little bit more detail of what each of these locations can do. Okay, now this right here is the merchant. Now, when you send your worker to this location, and you'll see here, there's 4 possible spots here. These can be used in all games. This is for games of 3 to 5 players, and this is for 4 to 5. So it makes sense, typical worker placement kind of deal, but you'll go ahead and place your worker, and you can perform up to 3 actions. All 3 can be buys. You can sell 3 items. And if you see here, each resource has a value beneath it. So in this case, 1, 1, 2, 2. And that is the cost. So wherever the cube is, that's what you're going to pay for. So for example, if you were to purchase here this copper, you can buy it, and that would cost you 1 favor to buy it. However, again, because you can buy and sell, I can also buy that for 1 and then turn around and sell it for 4. So I would actually have made 3 favor in doing so. And then I could turn around and buy something else if I so chose. If I had wanted to. So in that case, that would be 3 actions in here to the merchant. Now, if you have any of these wild cubes here, you can actually turn around and sell them in any of these locations. So if I had this wild cube, I could sell it for 5 here if I wanted to. However, if I came here and I saw this wild cube here, I could actually go ahead and buy this wild cube. So while every area has to be its own resource, these wild cubes can actually be anywhere in the market. Now, after doing up to 3 purchases or sales, this little area right here, you see this. Now this means that you optionally can play 1 fortune card. So if you wanted to, you could play a fortune card out of your hand. In this case, I just grabbed this. Resolve one of your placed workers. Again, the worker does not activate a network. So you would be able to do this, and then you would just discard this fortune card. You also see right here, it says at the end of the round, and there's that down arrow. When the year is over, you have to refill the market based upon your resources. Now, your resources are finite, so you will run out throughout the game. Somebody's going to be hoarding them. But at the end of the year, you will move all of these down like so. And then if there are any resources that don't have 2 and you have any in the supply, you can fill that in like so. Now, if let's say that this wasn't there, let's say we were all out, if you had any exotics available, you could put those in its place. Next here we have the trader. So let's say you put your worker there. Then you can trade any 1 resource you have for any 2 other resources, as long as they're not the exotic. So you would never be able to trade for a blue cube or an exotic cube at this point. However, let's say you had one of these green food cubes here. You could trade this for any 2 other resources, as long as it's not exotic and it can't be for one that you have already. So if I were to trade this in, I could take, say, 1 wood and 1 stone from the supply. Also here, just as with the merchant, if you do this action, you may choose to play a fortune card from your hand. So you could, in this case, all opponents must return 2 resources of their choice from the supply. And then you would just discard that card. Next here we have the Foreman space, and if you play here, what you can do is you can build one of these locations. Now, there's a resource requirement, so if you look here on this card, for example, you would need to have 2 food and 2 copper in order to build this card or purchase this card. But let's say you had that, you would take this and just put it in front of you, and then you would gain the favor points. If you look, each set of cards, except for this top one, has 2 sets of numbers, and you would total that up and that would go to your score. So in this case, let's say you bought lumber camp for 2 food and a stone right down here. That would give you 9 points. Now some of these buildings actually have a space here, and then you can later use this space and put one of your workers here and do the actions on that card. Now there's a ton of different actions. I'm not going to go through them all, but every card is going to have its own action, whether it's a space or a bonus that gives you, like in this case, extra favor for something that you do. So once you, whenever you visit the Foreman, you can purchase these. In addition, after buying a card, you may then place one of your customs houses anywhere on the map that has an available spot. So you see here how there are these two areas, and this one's for a 5-player game. I could put my custom house there, and then if there are any road pieces left, I could use them to connect 2 areas to start forming a network. And we'll get into networks, how that works in a little bit later. Now next here we have the Levite. So if you were to put your worker here, you then have 2 choices. You can pay this set of resources here, so a stone, a wood, and a food, or a gold and a copper, and then you could take 1 piece of the temple, and that would be you building the temple. Now each one of these pieces has a hidden number on the bottom, and this becomes favor points at the end of the game. So if you were to build this, you would take this, keep it hidden, and put it in front of you. Now if you were putting your player here and there was already a worker here, you would have to pay the resource cost of either one of these, plus you would also pay 1 additional resource of your choice for anybody else who was there ahead of you. So if I placed my worker here and this guy was already here, I would pay whatever I need to pay to build a piece of the temple, plus 1 additional. So then, for example, then if this guy comes, he would pay the resource cost plus 2 additional cubes of any color. Then after doing that, you'll see this icon right here, and this means you get to draw a fortune card from the fortune deck, and you can put this in front of your player. And again, if you don't play those cards, you can save them and they're worth 2 fortune at the end of the game. Now we're going to talk about the land of Israel, which is this section of the map here. Now you'll see there's a couple circles with a line through them. These are shortage tiles, and those are placed randomly at the start of the game. And the number that you place is going to vary depending on the number of players playing. So now here in the land of Israel, you can place one of your workers on any open worker space. So let's say I were to place my worker here, and I would be able to take 2 food from the general supply. So right, I got my 2 resources, that's great. But, so here's where it gets even cooler. Now if I were to put my worker here, same thing, I could take that resource. However, if there's a custom house in that location, I can't put my worker there unless I have a custom house. So I would never be able to place my worker here. I could put him here, anywhere else around, just not in the location unless I have a custom house there. Later in the game, if I were to visit the Foreman and build a custom house here, I could then come to this location, no problem, and be able to get that resource. So now as the game goes on, you're going to see customs houses are going to be built as well as these roads. And this is where it gets really cool. This is when you start to use the network as far as the resource gathering. So let's say that this is what the board looks like, and I'm going to place my worker right here on Jashur. Now, I would collect this resource here, so I would get 1 stone. And then I could follow this road, and I would be able to collect, because this road connects here and there's no opponent's customs house here, I would get to take this resource as well. And then I can continue to follow the road, and I would go down to here. So Moab, I would not be able to take this resource because it's not in my network, because an enemy's or an opponent's customs house is there. So let's go this way here. Now both blue and white have a customs house, so because that has a blue house, it's in my network, so I would get to take a wood for that. I can go down here to Philistia, which has 2 food, and I would be able to take those because there's no worker here. And then even though this goes over to Judah, we see there's a worker here, so that's already been taken, so I cannot take that gold. But you see, just by placing my worker right here, I was able to gather a good amount of resources. So as the game progresses, this gets to be very contentious, because you might see somebody start putting their customs houses on an area, and depending on where the shortage tokens are, you might really be fighting. There might be a shortage of, in this case, food, and your opponent might have a customs house here, or you might want to put a customs house here because there's a shortage of food. And then as it goes on, this gets tighter and tighter, and you might in the beginning get a whole lot of resources, and as the game goes on you might get minimal resources. So this is a very cool dynamic within the game as far as resource gathering, and things are sometimes very plentiful, and other times, because you can get so many resources at a time, the resource pool is finite. So you may place one of your workers and in hopes of getting a bunch of stuff, but you'll only get a couple of items. And even though that, let's say that there was no stone left in the game, if I put my worker here, I wouldn't get that stone. I could continue to get the other items, but stone is gone. So again, as the game goes on, these resources get really, really scarce. And it definitely creates a very cool dynamic within the game as far as collecting resources in order to build a temple, or in order to build different buildings by using the Foreman. So it's definitely a cool dynamic. And finally, right here, we have the holy place bonuses. So there are 4 different places here. Now, when you choose this action, you put all of your remaining workers there. So if you're blue in this case and you have 3 workers and you pick one of these actions, you have to put all of your workers there, and you would at that point end your turn. So, and the reason that is these are pretty powerful. They're going to give you a lot of stuff for doing them, as well as the very first person who places any workers there. So let's say I'm blue and I place a worker there, I would be able to take this first person token, or first player token, and be the first player on the following year. So this becomes a very important place in the board, because you might have 2 or 3 workers left, and you might really want to gather the items associated with one of these, but I'm going to wait because I have 3 workers and I don't want to sacrifice all 3. Meanwhile, the next person might say, you know what, I really want this, I don't want them to have it, boom. And they would get the first player marker, and then they would get their first pick of whichever one they want. And these each do different things. So this is the Ark of the Covenant, and this lets you draw 3 fortune cards if you put your guys there. And again, once somebody puts their worker pawns there, nobody else can place in that location, so that becomes taken. This right here is the menorah, and if you place your workers here, any of your opponents that have 7 or more resources must give you half of their resources rounded down. So if you see somebody start hoarding resources, especially when it comes to the land of Israel and utilizing the network, you can go to the menorah here and you can take a ton of resources from your opponents. This here, the altar of incense, that lets you take 1 exotic resource, as well as it lets you take 8 favor. So this is a good way to play catch up with the victory points. And finally, the table of presence. This gives you 1 of each resource with the exception of the exotic resource, as long as they're available. So if you were to play here, you would get 1 gold, 1 copper, 1 stone, 1 wood, and 1 food. Now, if any of these resources are gone, let's say that all the copper is gone, you would get all the other ones, just not that copper. So one other item to note too is I know that I mentioned that at the end of the year, when the round is up, you move all the resources in the market down. However, you'll also move, let's say a couple of these buildings have been purchased and they're gone, then you would in turn, you would move any of the flipped buildings down, and then you would continue to fill these out here. So that way you can refill the buildings. All right, and in a nutshell, that's how you play Wisdom of Solomon. Now I'll take you back up top and I'll give you my thoughts on the game. All right, now that was Wisdom of Solomon. All right, so let's start by talking about the components of the game. So this was a prototype copy of the game, so what was there is subject to change. However, everything was a good quality as far as a prototype goes. I know that the houses are going to change to be a little bit bigger to fit the spaces on the map, but everything else about the game felt really good. The cards were good quality, the pieces and the wood cubes, everything was good. I also enjoyed the art in the game. The building cards were very colorful and lively looking, and they were bright. I appreciated that. The art looked really good on those, as well as the fortune cards were more muted in nature, more of like a pencil drawing, and I felt that fit the theme also. And the art style difference between the 2 sets of cards I think played off themselves very well. The board also did a great job at giving the feel of a desert. It was muted colors, muted browns with some greens. It definitely felt as though you were in Israel doing what the game was themed around doing. So now let's talk about the gameplay of the game. So first of all, I love worker placement games. Wisdom of Solomon did a great job at executing the worker placement mechanic because every option that you had for your workers felt so different. And each time you did something, typically you got to do something else. And I thought that was very cool. And I also like the way the game used the resources with this, because there was always a shortage of resources. So in the beginning of the game, yeah, they're there, and it's pretty fair game to get the resources. But as the game goes on, as people are building their networks, and we'll get back to the networks in a minute, but as people are building their networks, the resources are starting to go left and right, and next thing you know, you don't have what you need. Now, there's also those top 4 spots where you can put your workers and then your turn that give you a great way to catch up, or a great way to kind of slow somebody down, steal the resources, give yourself a bunch of points, which was a really neat mechanic because you had to kind of balance the risk reward. Do I use 3 workers or 2 workers so that I can steal the first player marker? I can go first next year, and then I can also do X, Y, or Z, or do I wait another turn as to not sacrifice as many workers and hope that that's still available? Because there's only 4 spots available. And if you're playing a 5-player game, you chance not being able to get any of those catch-up options. I really like the method of earning favor in this game because you had options all over the place to earn favor. You could build stuff, and I like the way that the building cards lined up, so something that may be worth 1 point is next to something that's worth 1 point. However, if you wait later, it might move up, so if you wait to build that, it might be worth more points later on. I thought that was a cool way to add favor points. I also really like the marketplace, in that you could buy goods and immediately sell it, and you could kind of control what was sought after. So you could hike the price up on some items, so someone who's in the lead might have to pay some of their favor to buy what they need. And I thought that was a great mechanic. But I really have to comment about the land of Israel and the networks. The way that worked with building your customs houses and being able to place your workers there to take resources, and the way the resources could chain. And you could, if you're not careful, somebody could run away and just place one worker and gather all sorts of resources. And it was cool to use, you might watch somebody running away with that, and by placing, by building something, you could put one of your customs houses in place and try to stop them from gaining momentum. And it might also be something that you're forced to do if down the road you see, hey, I want to be able to get some wood, and somebody else is taking all of those options, so I'm going to have to build here now and maybe build something I don't really want or build sooner than I'm ready to because I want to make sure that I can get a spot here. And the way that the networking in the game worked was really, really cool because it was raining resources, but then there was an immediate shortage. So it was a very cool mechanic to the game because 1 minute you might have a ton of resources, or somebody might take a ton of resources, and then there's a drought. There's nothing. You can't get what you need. I just really enjoyed that fact of the game. The shortages of resources also really makes the game tense, as well as watching people build pieces of the temple, because if they're building the temple, they might be getting 10 points, 10 points, 10 points every time they go. And you want to be careful that somebody can't run away to it with the points in that way. So the game is it's a very tense game in a fun way. If there was any downside to this game for me, it was with everything being so go and so many different options that you can do. When somebody either takes the last tile to the temple or plays their last custom house, it's kind of a bummer because the game's going to end. And I know that for me that happens in a lot of games. I feel like they end and I want them to go longer. But somebody does that and you might have a couple of workers left and you realize, well, I can't get the resources that I want to build anything because I don't have the workers or I don't have the resources. So you might just have to end your turn right away. And in a lot of ways you would do so in taking one of the top 4 spots. However, if somebody already beat you to it, what good is more resources to you? But that's a testament to the rest of the game and how really tense it is in a good way, not in like a frustrating way, but just the tenseness of, I want the resources, but there's not enough, and I have to build this, and there's so many options, and it's such a good feeling when you're going through the game. All right, now the audience of this game. So Wisdom of Solomon is a biblically themed game. However, I think that this appeals to a larger audience. I don't think this is something that you would stick specifically to a person who's looking for a Christian game. This is a game that is very historical in nature, number one, and the gameplay of it is fantastic. So if you're looking for anything that's surrounding ancient times, I think this game would definitely be a fit for you. And I think as a whole, theme aside, the gameplay of this is fantastic. This is a game that I've played with people that are interested in the biblical theme and who couldn't care less about a biblical theme. And everybody that I've played this with has greatly enjoyed this game. It plays quickly for a worker placement of its style. I think our plays have typically come in under an hour, usually maybe around 45 minutes. It's tense, it's enjoyable. So I think that this is a game that if you're into games and into worker placement games, that this would be a game that you would be interested in playing. The replayability factor on this one I think is also quite high because you have the randomness in the building cards that come out. And because the shortage tiles are always random whenever you play, it definitely adds a different flair to how you play the game. So you can't really nail down any specific strategy. So I think this definitely is a game that you would be able to play again and again. So all in all, I have absolutely really enjoyed this game. I love worker placement games. The theme was a fit with me, and everybody that I've played it with has really enjoyed it. It plays quick. It's once you explain the networks, that might take you a minute to explain to somebody how that really works, but once you get through that, it's an easy game to learn and to grasp. And it's fairly accessible. Since receiving the prototype of this game, we've played it a number of times with multiple player accounts. We've always enjoyed it. I definitely enjoy it. I think with more players, it gets a lot more tense. When it's just 2 players, you have a lot more freedom to do stuff. But as soon as you start adding 3, 4, or even especially 5 players, the board really tightens down on you, and it just really ramps up the competitive nature of the game. So I thoroughly enjoyed that. So if you're a fan of worker placements and the theme seems interesting to you, I would absolutely recommend that you check out this Kickstarter. All right, guys, that's it. Once again, this is Lee with Geek City USA. Thanks for hanging out with us. Be sure to comment down below and like and subscribe if you don't already. And also check us out on the other social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I'd love to interact with you guys there. And definitely send me a message, leave me a comment. And again, just love to go back and forth with you guys. So thanks for hanging out with us, and we will check you out next time.